Welcome to another episode of the Brooklyn Boardroom, where we break down media, tech, and entertainment business through a no-frills dialogue with actual stakeholders. And if you need help with any of your own endeavors, feel free to holler at me at industryesquire.com. If you need to talk through the phone, need forms or facilitation, we got everything you need. So today's Brooklyn Boardroom guest is my man, Barion Grant.
Thanks for having me, man.
No, this is good to be here, brother. Long time no see. Yeah, Barion and I started out together at MTV quite a while ago, but Barion's done well with himself and he's doing big things now. So we're gonna walk a little bit through Barion's background and then hear from the man himself. And by the way, Barion hails from originally from Newark, New Jersey, but he's in today from Harlem. So Barion's a tech entrepreneur that built a digital news blog known as the Grio, which was targeted toward the African American audience, which was later sold to NBC. Congrats on that. That's a big move. That's a boss move.
Thanks, bro.
And at his departure, which was back in 2012, the Grio boasted over 2 million monthly unique visitors, 100,000 monthly video streams, and over 1 million followers across all social media platforms. Then Barion segued into producing. You know, he's produced over 100 hours of programming content in all forms of media, including traditional and social media. And one of his most notable projects is the critically acclaimed "A Genius Leaves the Hood," the Jay-Z documentary, which aired on TV One as a #1 movie. And then lastly, Barion is also a digital strategist, where he works to connect brands and organizations with niche audiences in digital media. So Barion is getting it. He's a baller. He's making it happen in the tech space, in the social media space, and traditional media space, which is why we needed him here in the Brooklyn Boardroom, because we need to break things down for our people out there. You know what I'm saying? From a layman's point of view.
We can talk about how it happened.
Yeah. Well, that's
what's happening.
That's all we got. That's what we're gonna do, baby. So let's get into it. So as you know, Barion, today's digital ecosystem is cluttered with like content. And a lot of the content is targeted toward the African American audience. But back when you were doing it, and I think the Grio launched maybe in 2009.
Yep.
Yeah. When you guys did it, this was the early days of the digital, just the entree into digital, especially for Black people. So back then, what was the environment like, and more importantly, what were some of the significant hurdles that you had to deal with back then to get your blog off the ground, whether it was business, creative, or personal?
Yeah, it was interesting because I always start these types of conversations with talking about the Grio. But even before launching the Grio.com, I spent almost a decade at MTV, which is where we met. So before even there was an opportunity for a platform like the Grio, I was learning to, be a great storyteller, And with that, do it in a way where I could reach a younger audience in order to get them to connect to a piece of long-form content. Mm-hmm. That was a challenge for a company like MTV, whose audience they were looking to reach 16 to 21-year-olds or 18-year-olds, depending on the program. Mm. So by the time, I'd spent almost, 10 years there, the question became, well, how can I do this? How can I take these skills and make them work for my audience? I was like, what is transferable about what I've done from, the time that I started here in 2000, where I can start to, produce, more short form content for an audience of color. So what I saw in the landscape at that point was there were some websites out that were producing a lot of digital content, but it was more, articles, and at that point, social wasn't it. It wasn't what social is now.
But back then, not to cut you off, I just want to identify some of those platforms, because some of them exist today. Like The Root was one of the competitors at the time, right?
Yeah, so The Root was out at the time. AOL Black Voices was out at the time. Mm-hmm. News One was around at the time as well. Huffington Post was just kind of kicking things off, with kind of reaching niche audiences. So there were a couple players in the space. With the Grio specifically, what we set out to do, because my background and my partner's background was in television production. So what we wanted to do was create a platform that was video centric, where we were really focusing on producing a lot of video, and we were kicking out, sometimes 20 pieces of video per day, if it was video that we were producing or video that we had access to through NBC's affiliates nationwide. So that was something that we really thought would make the platform unique, and that really worked for us when we kicked things off in early 2009.
And then, so when you kicked it off in 2009, was there like an immediate like success story, or did you encounter some real or some significant pushback, whether it was business, creative, relationally? Like, what was?
No, I it would be great to say that there was immediate success and people loved it as soon as we turned the lights on. But to be honest with you, when we kicked things off, I remember going into 30 Rock every single day, and sitting with my partners and saying, is this going to be the day they turn the lights off? Is this going to be the day when we walk away from this venture, because no one really believes that it's going to reach the heights that we've been pitching, for the last 6 months before we kind of kick things off. So we weren't really sure. We knew that we were entering a space that was growing, because there were some platforms that were pursuing Black news. We also knew that we were entering into a space with a partner that was huge. We partnered with MSNBC.com in terms of our technology, and we were a division of NBC News. So, every day it was us looking out onto the landscape and seeing the competitors, but also, working with such a huge company and wondering if the idea, the concept that we were passionate and excited about, if it was going to get to the next level, if, we were going to have the opportunity to really engage with the audience and with brands in the way that we had wished to. Luckily, when we launched with a sponsor, Ford, that was our advertising partner for the first 6 months. So we really had the benefit of really growing the audience, focusing on growing the audience and building a brand. So for us, it was really great that we weren't, out in the space really having to, spend an equal amount of time on daily monetizing the platform. We were able to learn a lot that we needed to learn because we didn't have a digital background. I learned about digital ad sales. I learned about ad operations. Like, I did not ever have to produce a deck and go out and sell a platform in the way that we did with the Grio. So we were able to really focus on building that audience, for the first 6 months, and really building the brand. So once we got past that 6 months, then we were able to, look at the data, look at the growth of the audience, and then really position the platform and go to advertisers and go to partners and say, well, here's what we've accomplished over the last 6 months, and this is what we can do for you as a partner.
Okay, there were a couple of gems in what you just said that I want to drill down on. One was, at the outset, you focused on serving the audience. It wasn't about the money.
Right.
So, which means you didn't have to sacrifice quality or sacrifice whatever the creative vision was for the sake of, paying the bills.
Right.
I mean, you obviously would have loved to have made money out the gate, but the circumstances allowed for you just to focus on serving the audience, right? And I think a lot of times we see businesses that are more focused on money than they are their audience, and then they sacrifice quality because of that approach. So I think that's something that I want, the audience and anyone who's listening to think about that. Everyone wants to grab the bag, make money, but end of the day, if you don't secure your viewership, your audience, your consumer, your subscriber, whatever it is, if you don't get them invested in what you're doing, they won't be there for that long ride, right? The second thing I think that's interesting that you talked about, and I don't know how this could be replicated for someone watching the show, but you started out with a little bit of support from Ford.
Right.
Now, how did that come together? Was that a relationship that, you guys generated yourselves? Was it something that NBC brought to you? How did that happen?
So I answered the second question first because it really leads into the first. The relationship with Ford started because we produced a film. We produced an independent film, myself and my two partners, and we licensed the film to MSNBC. The film was called Meeting David Wilson, and it aired on MSNBC. So that's how that relationship started with our production company and NBC News, because of that documentary Meeting David Wilson that we licensed to the network. So we started having conversations with them about producing more projects. But there was just so much conversation that was happening at the time about, you know, what people of color thought about, you know, particular issues, if it was housing, if it's education, if it was healthcare. 2008, 2009, you know, President Obama was not quite, you know, president yet, but, you know, running. And there was a lot of dialogue that was taking place. And we said, well, instead of producing another film, you know, a one-off project that may do well, you know, the film actually did really well. Our first film on MSNBC did really well. But instead of running that risk of just producing one project and having this one opportunity to, you know, have another shot at reaching this audience, we said, well, why not do something that's more long-term? We weren't too familiar with the digital space, but MSNBC.com was a partner of NBC News, and we licensed our film to NBC News. So we said, well, can we partner with MSNBC.com to create a platform where we're telling these stories on a daily basis in short form? So instead of doing another feature-length documentary, can we do, you know, 3-minute, 5-minute, a minute and a half type news packages, shorter pieces talking about healthcare, education, news, hard news, soft news, the stories in our community, specifically those that we didn't think were getting told, or specifically told from the perspective that we wanted to see. So that was a pitch that went over really well. They were really excited about it, and then that became the concept for the Grio. So the project that we did with MSNBC was Meeting David Wilson. That was sponsored by Ford, and then we were able to continue to have conversations with Ford about this next project, which was the Grio. So that's how that happened.
Interesting. Yeah, no. So the jewels that I'm getting out of that, and, you know, obviously correct me where I'm off, but it seems like, you know, the big endeavor of the Grio, you know, was the byproduct of a much smaller endeavor, which is with this business that you had with Ford, meaning you brought value to a business partner or business relationship that then was valuable to you in the next iteration of your project, your career, your advancement of this idea you had about content for Black people. So I think, you know, the jewel for people watching is, you know, whatever you're planning on doing, whatever the endeavor is, I mean, you have to obviously plan out the stages. But, you know, at the early stage or even at the later stage, be in partnerships with people that you bring value to, or businesses you add value to, and it changes the dynamic of the relationship, because obviously you're serving their need or whatever that expectation is, and then they're thereby serving yours, versus being in these very one-dimensional relationships where you just like, give me this and you're not going to get anything in return for it, or if you do, who knows when, right? So I think that's interesting. Another thing I think is interesting is, you know, the success of the business it seems to be a byproduct of the fact that there wasn't anyone servicing this particular area of the African American community. Like, the information you were providing to people in the digital space that was branded or targeted toward the African American audience, there wasn't another place for them to get it. There weren't lots of places. And the type of information, obviously, if you were programming music videos, there's tons of opportunity for them to find that on tons of programming platforms, digital, otherwise, back in those days. But you're talking about, you know, relevant news topics, things that have to do with health, politics, like, where do they turn, you know, back then, where would you turn back then for that? So clearly, you know, you guys found a gap in the information landscape of our community and were like, yo, we got to serve that gap. So I think the jewel for anyone listening is figure out where those gaps are in whatever the endeavor you're pursuing and seek that out as the opportunity versus something else that may not be in demand or in need. So,
can I just jump in?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I think that the part that's really important in all of that is partnerships. You know, so for us, it started with a film. You know, it was 3 guys that went out and raised money to produce a film that we worked on for over 2 years independently. The lesson that we learned from that as independent filmmakers was that you can't do these types of projects on your own. It doesn't make sense to pick up the camera, do it for 4 years, kind of carry the whole thing on your back, but bringing in investors, bringing in people with mutual interest, bringing in people that had the resources to help you get things done. So by the time the film was complete, shopping it and thinking about, well, who wants to be a part of this conversation that we're having in this film? That really became the theme. So connecting with MSNBC, who was looking to do something for MLK Day. We premiered the film on MSNBC on MLK Day.
Wow, ironic that here we are the day after MLK. Or maybe today's the official MLK Day, right? Yesterday's a holiday, but is today actual MLK?
Yesterday was a holiday. I don't know if today is actual.
I don't know. Either way, we're definitely in the MLK Day range. You know what I mean? Yesterday or today. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
But it was interesting because they wanted to premiere the film in February, Black History Month. It was just kind of like the obvious choice. But here's the opportunity with partnerships. What we were able to bring to the table was, we said, well, in February, this is going to be happening in all these other places. Everybody's going to be kind of focusing on, what their initiative is for the African American community during that time. And because we were researching and writing and we've been working on this film for so long, we saw that there was an opportunity to premiere the film on MLK Day as the 65th anniversary of the March on Washington.
Wow, that's big.
So as a small player that, was in the trenches, really doing the research, really being intimately familiar with our story, we were able to pitch something that also had value to a partner. So it goes back to that idea of partnerships and what you bring to the table. We were able to say, hey, well, instead of doing it in February, can we do it in January? And we were able to own that time period. Yeah. So it really established a valuable relationship where, NBC News trusted us. So for us to pitch the Grio, and for us to say, well, we want to continue to have a conversation with Ford, as you're saying, like, present yourself as a valuable partner. So in everything that I do now, as I'm thinking about, well, what's the concept, even for, the event that I'm out here for this weekend, I called you up. I was like, hey, come. I know that this is something that may be of interest to you. And then as you present yourself as a valuable partner, you're presenting value at the event. I'm presenting value by inviting you to the event. And then everyone really sees that, it's not just coming to the table and saying, hey, this is what I have. What can you do for me? It's coming to the table and saying, this is what I have. How is it of interest to you? How can this help advance what you're doing? How can this be something where we can mutually benefit as partners? So I think that partnerships are really the theme of my career and everything that I've done in order to get things done.
And the other jewel in that is strategy, surgical strategy. 65th anniversary of MLK, tied into the theme of the film, tied into the strategy of partnering with Ford. All of that stuff was lined up in a way that it made it that much more impactful, right? You know what I mean? So it's, it's chess, it's not checkers, right? So that's deep. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about the transition. As you were transitioning out of this tech entrepreneurial space, moving back to producing, but on a larger scale, what was some of the life lessons learned from that experience with the Grio, the journey you were on, like, that you took with you as you transitioned out?
As I transitioned out, there were a couple of things that I learned. I think that I would say that I was more curious, upon my departure. I was really curious about what I learned in the digital space and really understanding how that could be leveraged to promote long form content. I was specifically interested because everyone was like, oh, Black Twitter, and I saw the results that we were getting, from growing the Grio to 2 million monthly unique visitors by leveraging Facebook, by leveraging Twitter. There was no Instagram at the time, but seeing that we were able to move the needle by taking our digital content and distributing it on social and seeing how it would just go viral. I was like, okay, well, if this is something that we can do with an article, if this is something that we can do with an original video, how does that translate to a long form film? How does that translate to programming and really trying to move the needle for something that is long form as like a marketing strategy leading up to it? Even once it's complete, like to continue that conversation, on another platform, if it's continuing the conversation online or if it's continuing just through like a marketing strategy to continue to really engage the audience. So those were the things that I was really curious about. So upon leaving, it was really kind of taking those tools because they were emerging at the time. There was no expert in terms of being a digital strategist, for, reaching a multicultural or Black audience online. Everyone was learning. It was like, well, what is this thing, Black Twitter? How does it work? Who do you call? And there were no answers to those types of things, but everyone was really participating. It was a really exciting time. So really trying to figure out, how to take those learnings and apply it to long form content, which is, where I originally came from, long form, producing features, producing like TV content. How could you move the needle with, partnering with, a studio or a network? And that's how Mogulum Studios came about.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So you leave the Grio and you move over to Mogulum. And by the way, I'm sure they asked this a long time ago. What the name? Obviously the Grio has its. Well, not obviously, but folks don't probably know that the Grio has its root in African. It's a describe where the name comes from.
A griot is a West African term for storyteller.
Okay, West African term for storyteller. Now, Mogadam is another name that I couldn't even begin to guess where the origin is and what that's about. Can you explain that?
The name existed before I got there.
Okay.
So in terms of kind of me communicating with the CEO and the team that was there, it was about being a mogul, being a media mogul.
Mogadam.
So it was moguldom.
Okay. Well, okay. I have thoughts about that branding, but we'll share it offline.
Moguldom Studios. It worked out for us.
No, it's all good. I mean, well, tell me. So what drew you to this new venture after being immersed in digital tech? The Black community, and here you go. You move out, and you go to a place called Moguldom, which is about building moguls. So what was the incentive? What was the motivation? What were you thinking, and what were you looking to achieve?
Well, Moguldom at the time was really about building its brand. Like it was, they were doing a great job with the digital properties that they had. So Moguldom is a holding company. So Moguldom owned at the time Hip Hop Wired, Gossip, Madame Noir. There were these, Black websites really, specifically reaching African American women, African American men, African American, well, not millennials at the time, but, Generation Xers that were really moving the needle. As like these smaller blogs were popping up, as people were starting to become social media icons, at the time. And they were doing a really good job interviewing these people, having these people write for them, and really growing their individual properties in the digital space. So what the CEO was really interested in doing was leveraging what they were doing in with those stories on the digital platforms and launching a studio. So he was curious and saying, well, is there an opportunity to produce long form content and use our digital platforms to promote those films? So what we set out to do was produce 10 long form documentaries. So they were features, and produce them over a 12-month period and use the websites to help market and promote the content. So they were released on digital properties, Amazon, iTunes, Google Play. But from the beginning all the way through the marketing and distribution, the idea was, well, what learnings, what data can we take from these properties that, are doing so well? So the topics in terms of, there was one film about Jay-Z as a businessman called The Genius Leaves the Hood. There was another story called 72% about African American, 72% of African American children being born to unwed mothers. There was another film called Black Church Inc., which was about the business of the Black church. And all of these stories were stories that were trending really well on their digital platforms. So it was a part of that research and development process by looking at what was really doing well on the digital platforms and really developing those into topics for films.
Interesting. I mean, look, I think clearly that's a strategy employed by probably most of the distributors and producers today, right? Everyone is, the first thought oftentimes is digital distribution before traditional, just because of the reach and because of the ease of it. So I'm wondering, what jewel came out of that experience, whether it had to do with consumption in the marketplace at the time, or effective business strategy, in terms of like using these themes as the basis and research for building out larger productions traditionally? Like what were some of the gems, the high and low points from that experience?
Um, well, I would say some of the high points was real-time data. It was, of course, like the networks and the studios, they kind of look at what's trending, but it was great to be in-house. Literally, the editors of the websites were upstairs, and the studio was downstairs.
Oh wow.
So we would be able to interview our editors, leverage their relationships, do surveys on the platforms as we were thinking through storylines. So those types of things were really cool to be able to do in real time. Like we would get in on Monday, talk about a concept that we wanted to shoot on Wednesday, and we'd be able to do a survey on social because they had that reach.
Wow.
So that was really cool, and you don't have that type of opportunity when you're working with a big, research is, oh well, let's do a survey, and then you bring in 100 people, and then it take a couple weeks to put together the questions.
Yeah, not the same flexibility,
Right. So
fluidity.
it was really dope to be able to do that in your target market. We wanted to specifically ask these questions and kind of get some insight from the people that we want to distribute to. I would say some of the harder lessons that were learned was really around distribution. Distributing on Amazon, Google Play, like those types of digital platforms. It was great because I think that a lot of people see, especially from the independent community, a lot of people see value in being able to, distribute on their own. Like my film is available. Like you can check it out right now. Go to this digital platform. But really, I think that where there was some learning in terms of, as that I took away from being in that position was really thinking about the distribution and the marketing from the very beginning. How does that affect the storylines? How does that affect the audience that we're looking to reach? What should we do once the film is complete to continue this conversation? There's a lot more that we could have done to really leverage the platforms that Moguldom owned to really promote the film. So there was a lot of really cool things that we were doing during the production process. In terms of monetization, I think that there was a lot more that we could have done in order to really work closer with the distributors or work closer with the audience to really let them know that these films were here and these films were coming from a media company that was owned by, a person of color. So I think that there was a lot more that I would like to have done really more on the distribution side of the business, working with those platforms. And a lot of people, I think, and I was one of those people at the time. It was like, hey, this film is out there. But once it's out there, you have to have dollars that are going towards really marketing that film when it's in the marketplace. So doing a lot more in that area has become like something that I'm really interested in.
It's interesting. The jewel I'm taking from that is, and a lot of folks who are filmmakers or producers oftentimes are so passionate about the product and the process, they're not thinking about the strategy and the long-term play. So one of the things you said, which was really interesting, was even before we start production, we need to be thinking about marketing and distribution and monetization and how this film, this piece of content is going to interact and be inserted into the marketplace. Like, yeah, we got to make it, and everyone, let's go make it. Everyone's focused on making it. We got to get the money. We got to pull everything together. But even before you do that, what's the strategy and plan? The marketing plan, like that you need to invest lots of time on that front end before you even greenlight production to make this whole thing effective and a productive endeavor, right? So I think that's definitely a jewel that I think anyone listening who has a TV show idea, film idea, or whatever, sit back, put the pen down when it comes to writing your script. If you haven't finished it, just give it some thought to how are you going to market this thing, and where is your audience, and where will it be distributed, and why are you choosing those methodologies, those conduits. So
Can I mention a great example?
Yeah.
So a great example in that case, especially when talking about the African American audience, is Straight Outta Compton. So when you say put the pen down, I think that what I really want people to really hear and understand is you put the pen down because there may be some storylines that you want to integrate into, act one or act two, or how you end the film. There's so many ways of integrating your marketing into your storyline.
Mm.
And straight out of Compton, like the marketing plan was genius. I was straight out of Newark, you were straight out of Brooklyn, everybody's straight out of Crunch,
Totally.
straight out of wherever.
Totally.
But that was a conversation that was had even after the film was done. But that
Wow.
was something that they were thinking about. It's like, okay, well, what should we call the film? Like, what is the theme? Like, what is something that can keep the story going, that could market and promote the film, get people to the theaters, drive people, on social platforms. So a lot of those answers are there, but we don't really ask ourselves that question all the time, because it's really about, you know, being in the story and
Yeah,
what am I shooting
exactly.
on, and how many
Yeah,
weeks are we going to be in production?
exactly.
All of those things, of course, obviously they're important.
Yeah,
But I've been in scenarios where you've produced a project and it sits in your closet,
exactly.
or it sits on a platform where no one's seeing it. So
Exactly.
there's a lot more power, especially with the power that a lot of people in our community have on social. There's a lot more power in thinking about that from the jump, integrating it into your content, and being able to execute on it on the back end.
Real talk. So yeah, no, on that note about power and what people are doing, our community is doing in social, tell me, from your point of view, what do you consider the growing opportunities in the digital content space today? Like there's probably folks listening and watching who are, maybe like you in the social media space, maybe content production, maybe marketing, maybe business, maybe law, whatever. But where do you see the growing opportunities in the content space today from your point of view on the ground?
Yeah. I think that the opportunities, well, and I've always, not always, post the Grio, I should say, I've had this mind of partnering with brands or partnering with the right organizations. So I think that a great example is Issa Rae's Insecure. A lot of times people wouldn't have assumed that HBO would have been a great partner for that. But there are a lot of, either, studios, networks, Facebook, or even corporate partners that are looking to reach our audience right now specifically. So I think that the opportunities in this space is, okay, well, who's looking to do something similar to what you're doing? You have a script, you have a concept, you have a web series, you have an idea for a platform. I think that there are a lot of opportunities around partnerships, because I've been in a situation where I, have, 10 people working on a project. You're looking to hire that one right person. We get so distracted by the process that we don't realize that we are that one right person for someone.
Interesting. That's great.
For someone that's looking to reach an audience that you have.
That's great.
For someone that's looking to partner on a story or a topic that you're already working on. So as you develop what you're doing, spend some time on Google. Spend some time like talking to people, like who's doing something in this space already. Is there an opportunity for me to partner with them? And what are the skills that I can possess where I can bring value and say, oh, well, this is what I'm doing on social. You don't really have much of a large footprint on social, but here's a way that we can partner together to execute on your goals and mine. I think that people are starting to see that, we don't have to kind of work in these, kind of siloed places. And I think that the narrative of people not seeing value within our community, I think that that's changing. So I think that there's a lot more opportunity for people to partner and do even bigger and better with the projects that they have by, working with some of the people that are looking to reach the same audience or tell the same story.
That's great. No, I like that. The jewel I take out of that is, the reality is there's a lot more opportunity around us than we realize, based on the fact that, we're in vogue. You know what I mean? Black content is in vogue, and whatever the skill set you have is, there's probably, because we're in vogue, there's probably a number of opportunities to partner with brands, organizations, companies, whoever, to bring about that business endeavor. And I know what people are thinking. There's a segment of the audience watching right now and thinking, well, how do I get a hold of these people? There'll be an episode on how to strategically connect yourself with, the brand or representation, because clearly there's a bit of a barrier for some of us, but we'll get to that. But for now, just think about, like, your ideal scenario and focus on that. So what I also want to ask you is this, what are the gaps you perceive, right now in the marketplace, whether it's technology, experience, where are those gaps that, just aren't connected and create challenges in the business?
I would say for me, and the reason why I bring up the idea of partnering, I would say that there's a lot of quality content creators out there. But I think that it's still difficult to identify that talent. So if you're in the space, I think it's probably easier for my PA or my production manager or my intern to say like, here, 10 really hot web series, But as an executive, imagine, even as a studio or network, I think that there's a huge disconnect from the people that are actually doing the work and doing it in a way where it's quality. To those folks actually having access and opportunity to work with those studios or to work with those networks, even for myself with, the projects that I'm doing, to identify, who's out here kind of doing this. So I think that and social helps. I'm starting to follow a lot of people on social to kind of, if I go to a film festival, I'm checking you out and I'm trying to stay abreast of what you're doing. But that connection of kind of access, I've often found myself in a place of looking to identify talent for a particular project. Do you have reality experience? Do you have live, TV show experience? Do you also have digital experience? And I think that the folks are out there, but I think that a lot of times people really get consumed with working independently. And I'm guilty of the same thing. I don't like being on camera. I don't like, promoting and doing the work of marketing what I do. I like doing the work and I like strategizing. I like being in the boardroom. I like being, kind of in the trenches.
Yeah.
But I think that one of the lessons that I've learned is that you have to do that work in order to be identified. Because just as hard as it is for me to find and tap the right person, I am the right person for someone else. So for us to continue to do that work, there are a lot of people that are always like posting or always doing something. But for the folks that are doing quality work, I think it's time for us to kind of all around step our game up and start to do the same thing and let people know what we're doing.
That's interesting. I listen, I definitely second that, in terms of my own experience in the business, and just for the audience to make sure you guys identify what we're talking about here. We're talking about really two things. One is the people that are 5,000 degrees above us or above you, they want access to your talent. They want access to your, excellent content. They just don't have the bandwidth and sometimes the conduits to find it. So what you have to do, whether you're a producer, director, writer, creator, actor, whatever, what you have to do is make that as easy as possible for them. Continue with the excellent thing you do, but you need to expand your reach. And obviously, the way to do it today is through digital, through social media presence. So even though you may much prefer to write, your 90-page, screenplay and spend every minute, doing that, or you rather spend every minute, working on some acting or acting out some element of some creative idea. The reality is you need, back to marketing, you need to market what you're doing so that people will find it. Because no matter how brilliant your talent is, no matter how great you are at what you're doing, it means nothing if it can't be, if it's not easily discoverable by the people looking. And the other thing I want to point out too is that there are folks out here who probably have zero creative talent, but are good at sourcing things, right? So if you're a person who you don't write, you don't direct, you don't act, you don't do anything, but all you do is sit on your couch all day and watch, Facebook feeds and, Instagram photos, and you liking all kind of Instagram models, whatever you're doing, if all you do is that, then actually that's a service, brother, or sister. Do that, but connect what you're doing with the people that are looking, and guess what? You probably find a job or an opportunity. So those are the jewels there. Just identify the fact that market and promote what you're doing heavily so people can find you, so you don't got to complain that you don't have a rep. And number two, if you ain't doing nothing, do nothing, but connect it with people who are doing something. You know what I'm saying? So
I think there's two parts of that.
Yeah.
That you talked about the marketing part. I think there's also a distribution conversation in that. Because studios or networks or people that you can partner with also want access to your audience. Your audience is authentic, right? So with that, they're trying to find a way to kind of distribute and connect to the people that we're already connected to. Like my followers on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, they're real people. So when I'm posting about my projects and when I see other people in my space that have like tens of thousands of followers and they're posting about their projects, those are real people. There's a lot of value, from a marketing standpoint, but also from a distribution standpoint. And there are other people out there that are like you that also have connections to the audience, because this is what we do. I'm seeing it as engaging with the people that I know as I'm working on projects or as I'm just living my life. But to someone sitting in the boardroom, they're looking at that as, well, that's my target audience, and I'm looking for a way to connect to them.
Wow, that's great. That's great. Well, listen, man, we're about to wrap up. I want to just make sure. Is there anything you want to promote, talk about that you'd like the viewers to be mindful of, whether it's something on the horizon or something you're doing right now? Anything you want to share?
Sure. A couple of things that I'm really interested in right now is working across platform. So there's a new organization called Men of Courage that is, a partnership between Ford and the Smithsonian Museum. So I definitely want people to keep an eye out for what's happening around Men of Courage. It's really a conversation about economically empowering Black men. So, telling the stories of our community, on the ground in terms of like actually being in local cities. We'll be, kind of going around from New York to LA to different markets, having an exhibit on the ground talking about the stories of Black men in our communities locally, but then also having a platform where there's content that you can share, resources where if you're a brother that's looking for a particular resource, you can come to this platform. So I'm really excited about building that out. Right now, you can follow Men of Courage on social media platforms and just kind of continue to watch what we're doing.
Yeah. I second Men of Courage. We were at the event last night and the night before that, and Men of Courage is fire. I would recommend anyone who comes across any of the events to support, and what you guys are doing, for Black men is pretty incredible. And I think it's going to really shift a lot of things in our world, to the degree we can remain consistent with that and build traction and support. So cool. Well, listen, this is Barion Grant from Newark to the Boardroom. Tune in for the next episode. I hope you enjoyed the content. Feel free to hit me up on any of the social media platforms. You have questions or you need support, whether it's on the phone, whether you need forms or facilitation. I'm Jay Christopher, Brooklyn Boardroom. We out.